that. And if you can't, please do shout out or let me know. I can't see you while I'm presenting, so you'll just have to unmute yourself and make a noise. So today's talk is called "What is the point of social science?" And it's a question that I'm asked a lot as a social scientist, because it's a subject or a broad set of subjects that has an interesting trajectory. It isn't always favoured by governments or commercial organisations, and often I think when you're thinking, particularly sort of 17 to 18, about what you might do next, it's often given a kind of tinge of danger or lack of respectability, particularly perhaps by relatives who don't always understand what the purpose of the social sciences is. So I suppose I'm here to sell a bigger story in a way, not just Keele. There's plenty of places where you can go on to carry on developing and studying your social sciences and humanities interests. And so I'm trying to and get you to think a little bit about that bigger question. What actually is the point? I'm going to start with a different question before I get to the main question, and that's the question of what is a university, actually, because I think it can really help us understand what the point of the social sciences if we understand where that's done. Where is that question about social science done? And often it's done in universities, and I'm going to tell you later that it's done in lots of other places too. But that question of what a university is our starting point, because I think it's easy to misunderstand the point of university. When we first invented universities in the medieval period, they tended to be beautiful, cloistered, in other words, hidden away ivory towers, places where, you know, special smart people could go and have big thoughts and, you know, write things down and never speak human and all of that kind of stuff. So that was what the original model of a university was, and it basically came out of monasteries. It was scholars who were reading biblical texts who kind of created this idea of studying things, right, and writing about it. And I think we've kind of morphed into the idea of the special place where special people think special things, to a model of university as a kind of extension school. It's just a place where, you know, you go and you extend your qualifications. And I think there's some problems with both of those models of what the university is. This is Keele Hall, by the way, our own ivory tower. I suppose another model of the university, which really kicked off in the modern era, so post-Enlightenment, for those of you studying history, sort of around the time of the Industrial Revolution, there was huge growth, and universities began to be seen as a kind of laboratory, a place where, you know, truth could be found, like in our new laboratory suite. Snuck that image in there. This is the place where science, you know, proper science with a capital S, is supposed to happen. And you can feel that sense of a university in this very revolutionary moment in the modern world as somewhere where we really generate facts and ideas. And actually, that is still a purpose of a university, like all the others. It is where science happens, not just natural sciences, of course, but all other kinds of sciences, and the broad model of knowledge that we use to describe studying, right, and researching. So yes, that's not the only thing a university does, but that's still quite an important part of it. Another model of the university is as a kind of engine of innovation and growth, and not just as universities like Staffordshire and Keele do provide in terms of employment and generating economic value for their local environment, but actually more directly, you know, the business school at Keele churns out, you know, managers, and it churns out lots of employable workers. And so that's one point of a university, is training the managers, doctors, teachers, social workers of the future. And so in that sense, the university is also configured, particularly I think by parents, as somewhere that delivers employability, that a degree should get you a really great job. And why not? I think often 17 and 18-year-olds think a little bit differently from their parents on this issue. And for many of them and us, you know, back in the dark ages when we went through it, university is about bright lights and big change. Big difference. It's about breaking out of the parental home. It's about, you know, having some fun and meeting other people and doing things and meeting people that are very different to you and different to your prior experiences. It's about opening your horizons and kind of, you know, trying out new stuff. And that's a really important part of what a university can be. I think it's also quite a personal experience for very many people, and that's actually quite threatening for many. The idea that actually you go to university to change who you are can feel quite uncomfortable for many people. But it is part of that transformation that a university can offer people in transition between youth and adulthood, that gives you that space to really work out what's important for you. Of course, it's a big investment doing that, and so we do need to see that people get that sense of growth, as well as that sense of employability, as well as that sense of, you know, developing their knowledge. So to start with, I guess the question is, can the social sciences take part in each of those functions, or does it only do one or two or none of those? Now, when we turn back to this question of disciplines and what they're for, you know, we know why we need sciences, don't we? It's never been more obvious right now, the value of scientific disciplines. Universities are those places where research science is done. And we can see all around us the products and the outcomes and the benefits of that. In medical and health sciences, we can see that incredibly hard work that's gone into understanding and defining and planning around vaccines and viruses and so on. So there's no question that science is valuable in our society and that it's valuable to be a scientist. It's never questioned, actually, or it's rarely questioned. Of course, scientists often get things wrong and they make mistakes and they make ethical, poor decisions sometimes, but the value of science is rarely questioned in Western societies. Sometimes we know quite well, or at least some parts of society know quite well, why we need the humanities in the traditional sense of the humanities, things like philosophy, history, English literature. We often think of the humanities kind of as a repository of all that is fantastic about human achievement. It's a sort of a collection of the pinnacle of human civilization: music, art, books, ideas, change. And this old grainy picture of the Keele Old Library it was the original library that the university used when it first opened in the early 1960s, part of the old stately home, and it's still used today. And when you know, managers who don't know their proverbial one end of their body from their elbow come and try and close the humanities, as they do on a regular basis, many of us over on our side say, yeah, but how would we know what was valuable if we didn't have scholars reading books and writing about books and collecting things and saving things? So the humanities is partly about documenting that idea of value. And if we don't do that, when we lose that, for example, when libraries are burned down or monuments are smashed, we do lose that sense of connection of where we've been, as well as where we might go in the future. So this gives value, of course. Many weddings are held in the old library at Keele, and the value of heritage is a key part of what historians contribute to in their research. Of course, it's not the only thing they contribute to. They try to contribute to stopping governments making stupid decisions based on the stupid things they did in the past. But that notion of collating and collecting our heritage is a really important part of what we do in the humanities. What about the social sciences, though? Where do we fit as a set of disciplines in this field? Well, so far so good. The university is a place to collect and improve and research the best of human endeavour and to solve our scientific problems. But we also have to ask some really tough questions, and that's really, I think, the main role of the social sciences. Who is going to help us understand what happens when society breaks down? And that's quite a catastrophic and negative way to put it, but actually understanding what the factors are that led, for example, to the Grenfell disaster is a really fundamental part of a particular way of seeing the world and asking questions about the world. Why did that have to happen is a fundamentally social sciencey kind of question, and somebody needs to hold on to those questions. Let's just take health, for example. COVID is all around us. Many of you will have sadly had connections to it that all of us have. The suffering from illness and loss, and also the suffering from the consequences of the pandemic in terms of economics and social engagement and life outside of four walls. And so thinking about what the determinants of health is also a fundamentally social science question. Here in Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire, for example, we have some of the worst health outcomes in Britain. We have high levels of infant morbidity, so illness, and we have an earlier mortality rate than many other more wealthy areas in this country. In other words, people die younger here. We know then that that's not just down to their biology. It's down to the kind of history of the experience of this area. So, for example, many people in Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire have lungs that are damaged by working in heavy industrial industries like pottery, but also like mining. We know, for example, that access to health and that falls unevenly according to your social class or your ethnicity is a particular issue in areas where we have high levels of poverty. So we can't understand, for example, COVID without understanding the realities of the complexity of health and healthcare. We can't simply find a single scientific magic bullet to be able to understand, for example, why ethnic minorities might suffer more with COVID, while still ignoring the cultural, social and economic factors around them. So actually, it's social science that is the core discipline of public health. Yes, medicine, and particularly the study of demography, or the study of large populations and how their health and response to medicine occurs, is fundamental to public health. It's what we call epidemiology, understanding the broad basis of the stats on health. But that's a social science discipline too. And then our public health officers do really good work understanding the on-the-ground nature of what's going on in groups of people, or families, or with individuals. And that's a fundamentally social science problem. I mean, for example, our colleagues over in West Africa who studied the Ebola outbreak some years ago found that they could not simply fix it with a vaccine or medics on the ground. It had to be fixed with social levers. And the reason for that, as we're all feeling very acutely now in Britain with an arguably less brutal virus, but one that's had a much more long-standing effect, we're seeing that the social levers are the thing, to some degree, that matter the most, at least in the first stages of the pandemic. We see that hands, face, space actually work. And it's the public health, social understanding of how people behave that really informs that kind of decision-making. So we can't manage without social science if we really want to fix problems like a global pandemic. And of course, even the physicists recognise that social science, because of its complexity, is really hard. A famous American public communicator of science, an astrophysicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, said, in science, when human behaviour enters the equation, things go non-linear. That's why physics is easy and sociology is hard. Of course, as a sociologist, he's completely right. Planetary motion is actually quite easy to measure. Well, I say easy. I have done a teeny bit of physics. But compared to understanding the complexity, the kind of ecology of the social determinants of health, it's relatively simple to kind of do a calculation. Someone quite smart has to work out what the calculation is. But in the social science setting, we actually have to work out how, it's almost like measuring the weather. It's one of the most complex things that we can do technically. Now, here's my colleague, Dr. Helen Wells, who's a criminologist at Keele. And one of the things that she looks at is road policing. So how do the police manage people's behaviour on the roads? One of the biggest problems at the moment is teenagers, managing to kill themselves by texting while driving. And so Helen asks questions like, well, how do we manage this with the kind of social levers that we need to nudge people's behaviour into appropriate activity? But before we get there, we have to kind of understand, what is it that drives people to do that? Is it just the fact that social media is everywhere? Well, actually, the answer is actually quite complex. it's something to do, not entirely to do, with the way that we feel when we're inside a car. We feel we're in a private space, almost like, and this links in with my research, we feel like an idea of home when we're in a car, as if we have complete control over our environment, and as if we can relax. It's a place where we take off our, to use a sociological term, front stage face, and we retreat to the backstage. And so we engage in backstage behaviour as if we kind of can control it. We're in a kind of bubble. And so texting just feels like another thing that you can do when you're on your own. Now, it's not a good idea to be relaxed and texting when you're, in a large lump of metal hurtling at 70 miles an hour towards the lorry. So actually, what we need to do is use social levers that recognise that more subtle sense of behaviour when we're in cars. And now, of course, that seems quite a long way from solving crime. That's not what criminologists do, of course. What criminologists do is not solve crimes like detectives, but they inform the decision-making that policymakers make around how we deal with criminal behaviour, how we change things like civil law breaking, which is kind of realm that Helen is interested in. So when we think about what's going on here in a broad sense, what we're doing then with social science, we can see that we've got big social problems that we've got to fix. And sometimes people like Helen or those public health scientists working with Ebola or the pandemic have a job to do that the government and large industries need them to do. We need to come in and fix the cart, fix the thing that's helping us to travel forward in society. You need to work out a better kind of wheel, or, a few more dollops of axle grease or whatever. We need to make things work better, solve problems, in other words. And those problems are around us, like public health, like poverty, like inequality, like education and educational access. Sometimes, though, I think social science has another job to do, and that's the one where we ask the big why questions, the big why did 100 people have to die in a tower block? And that's more, I think, smashing the cart and inventing something new. And that's really a role for the social sciences and the humanities, actually, to ask those big human questions. Do we have to live like this? Why do we have to live like this? And that fundamental need, that curiosity that's also about change, is really central. And we're unapologetic about it in the social sciences, that it should connect to our sense of ourselves as humanity, because why else would we do it? We might, of course, want to be instruments of capitalism, and of course, most of us are, because we need to be paid, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. But actually, what's wrong with connecting to the idea of making a difference? Lighting a fire, changing things for the better. That's what we should do. That's what drives many of us into social science. So in the fixing the cart model of social science, what we do in universities, for example, and on your A-levels or BTECs, is that we teach social science skills, and these are specific to many of the subjects that you will be studying, and many related humanities like history, geography, philosophy. We teach rigour. That's one of the key things that the social science does. It's about presenting arguments. It's not about seeing all sides always. It's not about always being balanced, but having good claims that are supported by evidence, a key part of presenting an analysis and solving a problem. And we do that with some very specific approaches. We use large surveys, we collect data, and sometimes we ask people what things mean. We collect qualitative data too. And that feeds into large areas of that social need to fix problems. It feeds into policy work, for example. It feeds into reporting for different kinds of organisations. Decisions are made on the basis of that kind of research work that social science teaches you to do extremely well. And if you can ensure that you keep a bit of numeracy alongside that, do a bit of survey analysis, do a tiny bit of stats, then you'll find yourself extremely employable in that kind of world. But the social science 2 model, the breaking the cart or burning it down and building a new one, is also really important, as I've said. And those skills, again, are a bit different. It's about reflecting on the past. It's about thinking about how things could be done differently. Often, actually, that's about empathy. And that's about developing empathy for people not like you. a famous sociologist said, if you're not curious about what goes on over the other side of the river, then you can't really be a social scientist. You need to want to look at other people and understand where they come from and give them the respect and dignity of their experience. And so a lot of what we do is reflecting on other ways of doing things. How is it done in that country? How is it done in that subgroup? How was it done in the past? How could it be done in the future? That sense of the social as something that humans create is really fundamental. And that leads to questioning, right? And it leads to critique, and it leads to irritating people going, yeah, but why, actually? And I don't think society could have thrived without those people. So we encourage that sense of imagination for the future and a kind of global vision of society, not one that's simply framed within, narrow local or national boundaries, but one that's genuinely a kind of approach to universal human growth. So in our university, we offer it in these areas. There are associated disciplines like geography and data science and other kinds of things that you could do, health and public health also at Keele. But in my school, the School of Social, Political and Global Studies, these are our core discipline areas for our degrees, so criminology, education, international relations, politics, sociology, philosophy, and we also offer a kind of broad-ranging degree in liberal arts, which I can talk about if anybody wants me to. Most of these subjects, not all, you can combine together, and we have a new route just emerging for the next academic year, which is social and political sciences, which is politics and sociology combined with a few extra bits. Where do our students end up? They end up in a wide range of professions, mostly, not exclusively, in the public sector. So I think a lot of that fixing social problems and breaking things up and trying to think of a better world lends itself to people who really want to work in kind of service professions, in teaching, for example, or in local authorities, in social care, in policing, in journalism. So those are the kinds of careers that our students tend to want to go into, and many of them do. But we also have a number who end up in commercial organisations, but particularly in specific functions within those. So, for example, in human resources or marketing in the case of sociology, in the civil service, often for those studying politics and international relations, and so on. And many go on to do a kind of post-degree qualification like teaching or social work, so they can go sort of straight into to those areas. And if you need any more persuasion that these skills are really needed, it's worth noting what the top skills were listed as by the World Economic Forum last year. And these are changing all the time. The World Economic Forum is a kind of conglomeration of government agencies trying to do good around the world. I'm beginning to look at they wrote a report called The Future of Work, and or The Future of Jobs, sorry. And The Future of Jobs said, look, we're going to be automated in 10 years' time. Virtually everything that we might, and we've seen it, haven't we? Automated education. Nobody loves it, but it's probably to some degree going to be the future for many students in 10 years' time. I don't think we should ever get face to face at all, as I'm sure you will agree. But nevertheless, what the jobs of the future are going to require is a different set of things. And we're already seeing that. And this links into debates about, have we got enough work for everyone in an automated future? And how do we manage economics in that climate? But we're going to need these things, on the left here. Complex problem solving is the #1 skill, not, number crunching. Critical thinking and creativity are the 2nd and 3rd level skills. So graduate jobs are going to look different in future, and they're going to look very different from your parents' jobs and very different from my job to a large degree. And so people with kind of what used to be called, and I hate this word, softer skills, all that does is tell us that, things like care and talking to people have not been highly valued. And again, the pandemic has shone a light on the real value of those kinds of roles in society, hasn't it? So all of these kinds of skills are absolutely front and centre in a social science degree and in a humanities degree, in ways that, they're not actually in many scientific subjects. They're getting it, and they're gradually drawing on this sort of wealth of human capacity that we see. But it's really our specialist area. And of course, then we do produce and need graduates who are highly employable. And we need graduate skills that are very specific to the social sciences, like digesting information, crucially reporting and presenting research, data analysis of different kinds, solving problems, addressing social problems, crucially learning to work with others, deploying that kind of empathy and understanding that the social sciences encourages you to develop, and experiencing difference, being able to cope or have the resilience to cope with that kind of the challenge of change, if you like. So I think what a degree does is it provides that employability rather than leading you to a direct form of employment. And actually almost all degrees don't do that. They don't have a direct employment route. They provide general graduate employability. I mean, if you want to be a writer, you could do a degree in English, but, graduates in English are employed in very many professions. So the very few numbers of degrees that have a direct employment route are typically those professional routes like law or medicine or social work, right? But most degrees don't, even in the sciences. You could go and be a chemist for ICI, but lots of chemists end up in lots of other fields doing chemical kind of things. So I think the trick for thinking about your degree is not just what direct employment will it give me, but what skills would align with what fields I might be interested in. Now, I mentioned the public sector and the voluntary sector and the care sector and the touchy-feely teaching sector that we are all here around. And all of those are the right kind of place for many social scientists, but not all of you. Some of you will want to be rapacious capitalists and just make loads of money and keep your parents off your back about why you're not earning anything. So I just want to share with you a report that came out last year, or a little bit of a report that came out last year, from an organisation called the Campaign for Social Science, doing exactly what I'm doing here, selling social science to the world, reminding everybody why it's a good thing. And they did some really interesting case studies with some really big corporations. And they asked a couple of questions, a couple of good social science questions. What is the role of social science in your organisation? How many staff do you employ who have social science degrees and in what kinds of areas? And do you value social science skills in your graduate employees? So here's just a couple of quite a large number of examples. You won't be able to read all of these, but I'll just point out some of them to you. So Cisco, who are a multinational technology company, gave a number of quotes outlining the ways in which they use social science skills within their work. Just as one example, I won't read them all. There's huge benefit to having people with social science skills. We have to think about the implications that our technology will have, social implications, and explore them, explain them to organisations, from realising the benefits through managing the challenge of change. This requires input from an array of social scientists specialising, for example, in business communications, economics, HR, law, marketing, operations, and politics to make our technology compelling. And you can see some of the examples there of the kinds of areas where social scientists are employed in the staff. So a key decision that you might want to make if you're thinking about this as part of your future is not what is the exact title of job that I can get as a social scientist, but what kind of areas will my skills be valuable? I won't dwell on the quotes. As I say, I will send you the slides, but you can see similar kinds of commentary from Deloitte, the large global accounting and consultancy firm. They pay a lot of money, by the way. And they, for example, you can see at the bottom here, they employ political scientists as part of their consultancy process. If you go and want to set up a firm in a distant part of the globe, you want to understand what the political crises in that country have been. So you need a political scientist to tell you, right? Royal Dutch Shell, they make petrol and oil and other things I don't understand. And they need sociologists and human geographers to go out to the field where they need to drill and to help, okay, I think it's a bit corrupt, but you might not, to help local populations understand why they need a drill there. They need to understand what the challenges and the problems are. It's like the kind of corporate capitalist version of the Ebola anthropologist, going to find out what is preventing people from washing their hands and what is preventing people from burying their dead in a way that's safe. We need to understand human meaning and human rituals and human behaviours before we can go in and save them or horribly rip them off. Choose your side. guess one question I'm often asked, particularly again by parents or skeptics, it's the kind of thing journalists like to say a lot. We don't really need university. You know, you can do all of those things. You can be a change maker. You can be a dreamer. You can be a good citizen without going to university. In fact, if you want to be a kind of political activist or a community activist or a creative, it's probably a good thing sometimes not for you to go to university. And I think that's true. And I'm not going to flannel it. You know, it's an expensive business. And although, you know, it's important to understand the costs of university are defrayed until later when you are earning enough to pay them. And actually, most of us in education believe that the government should fund free education, but that's another story. So you can do a lot of these things without an education at university level or any level, really. And lots of people do. Lots of people are change makers in the community. But actually, I think there is something about the kind of the rigour and the demonstration of independent thinking that a university education gives you that does something that's also really crucial at the moment, and that's to help draw out the difference between good quality knowledge and fake news, or lies, as some of us prefer to call it. And that, as we've also seen in the last 4 years in particular, mentioning no specific political regimes, that has also been a major issue that we can see around us as something that's really changed and arguably damaged our societies. So that commitment to a particular kind of knowledge is the bit that a university gives you that you can't actually necessarily get easily elsewhere. So there is no one answer, you know, to what universities are really for. Yeah, you know, we make vaccines. We've changed the world. We should pat ourselves on the back. And some of you will be sitting there going, no, you didn't. Actually, pharmaceutical companies made the vaccines. But I'd like to just point out that, yeah, it's a collaboration. And that's how often, you know, science and social science work together with other organisations and businesses to make change happen. I mean, it's also true, of course, that businesses innovate and create value and create change. But there's a crucial bit of this, which is that the universities also trained all those pharmaceutical scientists. It taught them all what they needed to know. One of the case studies in the report I just shared with you is by Ipsos Mori. Ipsos Mori are a major polling and market research organisation. They do loads of political polling, and they do loads of market research, and they do loads of social research. Everybody just about they employ is a social scientist, and if they're not, they're using their statistics from, you know, natural sciences to deploy in a social sciencey way. Someone taught them how to do that too. That's what university does. It provides the knowledge base. We produce the knowledge in our research that writes the textbooks that go on to A-level curriculums. So as well as teaching, that's what university is for. It's that role of joining up. And I suppose the good thing is when you get someone who is doing interesting research like Helen Wells, you get it from the horse's mouth as well as via the textbooks. So if for a kind of pair of things, there's a sort of dual argument here. Yes, universities and the social sciences are for a job and money and salary, but it's also about values and making a difference. Yes, having a degree can guarantee you, perhaps not straight away in this climate, but in the longer term, career opportunities. Actually, and that's quite an important thing to say, it's really hard for graduates at the moment. Getting that first job is really tough. And we do find that the period between leaving university and then getting what we would consider a graduate job is getting longer. So you do have to take a realistic approach to this question. There are very many kind of apprenticeships and paid degrees or other routes into work that might suit you better. But it might give you that opportunity for growth and challenge that you might not be able to get in that other kind of workplace. Are universities for compliant service of government and industry needs? Sometimes. But we're also about challenging that. Trying to seek greater democracy, greater access to our own civilization, our own humanity, and to curate and keep those stories of history and culture that are around us. And are we about giving the right answers to technical skills? Yeah, but we're also about encouraging people to be open to the unknown unknowns. The philosopher Stefan Collini said this, and this is really important to me, this idea: human understanding, when it's not chained to any instrumental task, is restless. It's always pushing onwards, though not in a fixed or entirely knowable direction. There is no one moment along that journey where we can say that the degree of understanding being sought has passed from the useful to the useless. So when your dad stands up and goes, sociology and philosophy, what use is that? You can remind them of the role of anthropology in helping to solve the Ebola crisis, and the way in which criminologists help, stop people getting killed on the roads, and the way we couldn't really fix the issue of what's gone on at Grenfell without a really long-term social science view of poverty. And Kalini's point is that we don't know with a short-term view what is useful, actually. And so if we cut it all off and decide we just want a hammer to hit a nail on the head without wondering whether we're using the right sort of tool, then we massively curtail our growth as a civilization. The end. Thank you. And I'm happy to take some questions at any point. I'll just stop sharing, bear with.
So folks, we're happy for you to put either questions in the chat or to unmute and ask Rebecca questions on anything she said today, or questions more generally about university and about Keele. So feel free to ask about anything that occurred to you.
I just drink my coffee, bear with me.
I mean, some things that what I found really helpful about today is kind of the twofold aspects. So thinking about why you would go to university and what university can bring to your life and other people's lives, but also what humanity, what humanities and so what's the purpose of studying humanities and social science. And I think what you've really emphasised well is the skills that it gives you and how they're useful, but also this kind of why knowledge is helpful and useful, and this kind of constant learning. So it's about developing as a person, but also contributing to society. So having lifelong knowledge. And this, you just mentioned about questioning, and I always say to the students, if you're not asking questions, you're not learning. So I think that emphasis was important.
Just while you're chewing that over, Sian, just to say, our students at Keele, I'm sure at your college you're all doing much the same, or you would be, were you able to be more, physically present. But our students are heavily involved in that kind of making a difference. One of the good things about universities, it gives you a lot of access to the opportunities for things like volunteering or student societies where you can actually change things from within. I mean, so there's really active kind of political societies in most universities of all colours and shades, and lots of sort of interest groups about particular kind of campaign issues, but also, quite a lot of kind of social stuff as well. So I think that's where that the sort of mixing that you get to do at university with people from all around the country and all over the world, that really, alongside those kind of opportunities to get stuck in. I mean, actually many students are already, heavily engaged in their environment. Most of them are working and, and volunteering and caring and stuff like that anyway. So it's not that this is new. I think it's just that university gives that sort of, gives you a space and, a bit of time to do that.
Yeah, I think that's important because quite a few politics students have said to me, how do I get involved in politics? How do I become part of that? And I suppose university gives you that automatic space, like you say, space to do that.
Yeah, so our politics programme has produced a couple of recent MPs. Jack Brereton is still an MP, and Gareth Snell was until the last election in Stoke, and they're both graduates of Keele politics, and there are many other kind of people who get involved in politics. So just for example, a classic route for someone interested in politics is to, if they're at university, they often get involved in their political party of choice at university, and they often end up working and supporting local MPs or local campaigns, for example, leafleting and stuff like that. And often those highly active students end up perhaps working in the local office of their MP, doing a bit of administration, getting a bit of work experience. And then many of our students then go on and they work in think tanks in London. Actually, at Keele, in politics, we have a module called Parliamentary Studies. And it's part of a national programme. So there's lots of other universities. Well, there's not a lot of other universities. I think there's about 20 universities that have it in the UK. And it's a module that is specifically, so you can get credit for it. You can work with the Houses of Parliament. So you go down there, you have a look around, you do some things. They come to us and they do lectures, and they talk about a lot of the kind of social science routes. And for example, the House of Commons Library is a really fantastic source of social science data if you're doing a project on something very contemporary. But it's also a good route in for people who want to work in the area. They need researchers and so on to give politicians briefs about this or that issue. So, and that's not just for politics students, but of course it's particularly attractive to those who are interested in politics. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, there are some questions. So yeah, you can see those. Yeah,
I can see those. So Charlotte's asked, if you want to study a social science subject at university, would you have had to do it at A-level? I'm going to give you a really honest answer here, Charlotte. At places like Keele, and we're a kind of, middle-ranking university. We do quite a lot of research, but we're very focused on our students' needs. The answer is, broadly speaking, no. So we're really happy to take politics or history or philosophy or sociology students if you don't have that background. We just need decent overall A-levels, and it helps if you've done a social science or humanities subject, because the main kind of skill is reading and writing essays, right? So that's the main bulk of the studying that you'll be doing as a social scientist, obviously in lectures and so on. But if you've come in with a physics or maths background, which actually was my background, what we want to see is evidence of commitment and interest. That's far more important to us in admissions than having exactly the right A-levels. And all our courses are designed to bring those who've studied it before and those who haven't up to the same level at the end of the first year. So it's not at all a barrier. I think what you've got to do is demonstrate in your application that you've got an interest in the subject through reading or through some volunteering or engagement or just kind of observing things around you. So yeah, that's not a barrier. So Lauren's asked about gap years and work placements being useful in a future career. Both. I think it's certainly the case that if you mean a gap year before university, I mean, I'm a big fan of that anyway, if you can afford it, because I think it just gives students that edge. They really know why they want to be at university if they've taken a gap year, and they've understood a little bit more about themselves, and they've kind of made the decision to, perhaps give up work or to move away from home or whatever it might be. So I just think that extra year does work for a lot of people, especially if you're unsure. And I'll talk about the foundation year in a minute, but a work placement before, during, after, as an intermittal, so you can take a work placement year at Keele, for example, for most of our subjects, and lots of other universities do that too. So for example, what happens is we have a unit who advertises year-long internships to people, and then students can also arrange their own. And you can take a year where you have, it goes onto your degree certificate. So it says, 3 years degree plus 1 year work placement at, whatever, Deloitte or whoever. So those kinds of placements are really valuable, and I would really look for universities where they have those opportunities and they have good connections and have experience at drawing those up. And there's lots of universities that do now, particularly within travel distance of Stoke, Manchester, Aston, Keele, and so on. And I think then the other question is work experience valuable? It really, really is valuable in terms of graduate employment. We find that the students who struggle most at the end of their degree are the ones who've not got any work experience at all. I think even, and your careers advisors at college will tell you this, even working in a bar, even if it doesn't seem relevant to your career, can be in lots of really important ways. I've got a really great video which is going to go up on our website soon. I did a long interview with one of our graduates. Her name is Sophie Lawler, and she did a degree with us some years back in politics and sociology. And she's now the chief executive of Fitness First, or Total Fitness, one of them anyway, one of the big health firms, gyms. Baptism of fire in the pandemic, because they were all obviously closed down temporarily. But she she felt that she hadn't used her degree when she graduated because she loved fitness and she went and worked in the gym. And she gradually got more and more opportunities to work in marketing, to work in human resources, to become a manager, to become a chief executive. And she says throughout, she's always deployed her graduate skills and her social science learning because she's worked where she's got to understand people, she's got to understand the human resources function in her business, she's got to communicate. So she's absolutely clear that even though it didn't feel like that at the time, her social science degree was incredibly valuable, you know, even coming out of something that she thought wasn't connected to the degree. So I'd say any work experience is valuable. Right, what else? Are social sciences ever practical? Hello, Catherine Eva Johnson. Are social sciences ever practical, like going outside of university to do research or get experience? Yeah, so for example, in my subject in sociology, we have students who conduct dissertations. So a dissertation is a final year project. It's a bit like a, I think you have them, don't they? Is it called a independent study project or something like that? At A level, it's a bit like that, but it's a longer piece of work, and we encourage students to go out and do research on the public. Now, we go through tight ethics procedures, we make sure they're not doing any harm, privacy and confidentiality is all managed, but that's one way in which you can do that kind of thing. The parliamentary studies module is another good example where people go out and about and they do some field work, if you like, in Parliament. And lots of our modules have that kind of approach. And the university, like many others, is they're gradually moving towards more practical, applied kinds of topics. Some degrees do offer, I don't think in our school necessarily, but some degrees do offer more of that. So, for example, in some places you can do an education degree that also has qualified teacher status attached to it. Keele is just developing that at the moment. At the moment, if you wanted to go through the teacher route, it would be a 4-year route. So you take 3 years of education and something, and then a PGCE afterwards. And likewise, there's other subjects in other departments where they have more kind of applied study, like social work is a good example. You can do an undergraduate degree in social work at Keele and qualify as a social worker. So yeah, it's a mix of kind of, you know, book-based and theoretical learning and some practical, but the dissertation is where much of that practical work takes place for many of us. Someone's asked about PGCE actually, and I'll come back to the rank question in a minute, Dylan. Tom's asked, I'm thinking of doing sociology and education training to become a teacher. Would it be beneficial to take a year out to work in a school before doing the PGCE or go straight into it after undergrad? I'd suggest, Thomas, that what you do is go to some of the open days and visit days of those institutions that you're interested in, and we offer sociology and education at Keele and a PGCE. And what my education colleagues would say is that whatever you do need some experience, right? So many of our students do it alongside their studies, so they volunteer in a youth club or in a school if a school's happy to accept them as a kind of reading assistant or whatever. But actually we do also offer some work experience modules on education specifically for those students who want to go into teaching. At the moment it's quite challenging because we're trying to do it remotely, but I think there's the PGCE training asks for a minimum number of experiential hours for you to apply. And social work's quite similar, actually. Again, if you wanted to go into, that's not in our department, but we do it at Keele. If you wanted to be a social worker, you'd have to demonstrate some kind of volunteering in a care home or in a caring role, etc. EPQ, that's the word, Sian, thank you. Dylan's asked, does the rank of university always matter? I'm just going to take a big gulp of coffee for this one. I would say yes and no. Classic social science answer. Let's start with the no. Actually, what matters the most, I think, but I'm speaking as an academic, and therefore I've got a vested interest, is the actual department and the quality of individual subjects in individual schools or departments. We call our department schools. So we've got our 7 degree routes, and I think they're all very good actually, but as a sociologist, I think we offer a really good programme in sociology. Everybody who delivers the programme is also engaged in research. Everyone has a strong commitment to teaching. And I think that's the kind of thing that you can only really drill down into by going to the open days or at the moment online. Really, really ask yourself, do I want to be taught by this person? You know, do they seem to care? Are they interested? is their information clear? I mean, you know, I always waffle on, but I hope that my slides are often clear, and I try to match those up, right? So is this person enthusiastic about their own topic? If someone's just going through the motions, I really wouldn't be taught by them. And sometimes that is more important than rank. On the other hand, so here's the yes, rank is important. Bigger Russell Group style universities, your Manchesters, your Leeds, your Oxfords and Cambridges, some of the London universities, they just have more money, right? I mean, that's one of the things here. Though for all kinds of complex economic reasons that I won't go into, they just have more money. They have more resource. They have more additional programs because they're able to provide those for students. They probably have more in the way of student support services, you know, and so I think that in that sense, that's what matters. In the outside world, does it matter? I'm going to say, sadly, it does, because even though I know the quality of education that your middle ranking or your so-called low ranking universities give you, you know, it shouldn't matter. And in terms of the values that I've been talking about, it doesn't. You know, I had a polytechnic degree as it was in those days, a new university degree. My education was excellent, right? There is something about being taught by people who are doing research. I think for me, that would be important in a university. But you don't want to be taught by people who are so busy with their research that they don't give a monkeys about what you think as a student. So I think it's swings and roundabouts. If you want to be a lawyer, it matters. You know, if you want to be a City of London lawyer, or you want to go and work in a blue chip company, as they're often called, as a senior manager, actually, in that case, rank does matter, because you're all good social scientists. Status markers matter in society in the same way that most of the government is run by people who went to Eton and Oxford. You know, those things matter to some people because it's a badge of membership. It's what we sociologists call a form of cultural capital that translates into social and economic capital, right? Go and look that up if you're a social scientist. But that's why it matters. So I've got a kind of slightly cynical view. It shouldn't matter, but it does. And I think that's where you've got to make a really informed decision about what you want. Of course, Keele is brilliant. So, you know, just come here. Right, what else? Studying abroad, really good question, Grace. Yeah, a lot of students study abroad at Keele. We have a really well-organised programme. And mostly they go to, this year it's challenging, obviously. Mostly when we're doing it normally, they go to North America, so Canada and USA. A handful go to Australia, and some go to Europe, or at least they did until, you know, we left Europe. None of us quite know what's happening now. We're supposed to be having a replacement scheme, but we haven't seen it yet. But when we could do that, we could send students to lots of Scandinavian universities where they often teach in English. So we have a really well-established set of partnerships with universities overseas. So you can do it in two ways at Keele. You can take a semester, and that's usually the first, so that's like a long term between sort of September and December. You can go for a semester in the first semester of your second year, and you don't interrupt your studies. So what happens is we put you on some courses over there, the marks transfer back to us. It's just a 3-year degree. You can also do what's called a year abroad, so a bit like the placement year. You can take a year to travel and go to different universities, and that is interrupting studies, so it will take you a 4 years to complete your whole degree. But the advantage of doing it in between your second and third year at university is that you can feel that sense of support that your 3 universities will give you, and also you know you're coming back to finish your degree. And what that often is used for is a student who's studying, say, we do a bit of anthropology on our sociology programme, but we don't do a lot, and some students really like it. So they often go to Canada where there's a strong anthropological tradition, and they use the opportunity to do some research that they come back, turn into a dissertation, and then maybe they'll go and work at Unilever as one of their in-house anthropologists, or in the World Health Organization, doing the kinds of things I was talking about earlier. So, and actually anthropologists are in high demand in marketing and advertising because they have specific research skills that are quite complex. So yeah, study abroad's really valuable, and I would, if you really want to do that, I would strongly encourage it. It makes that whole thing about opening your eyes to wider horizons, I think it's just a brilliant thing to do. combined course have more employability than a single? Again, that's a really good question, because in some cases, employers love it, right? So employers tell us they want broad-ranging thinkers, people who can think of things from different angles. And so doing, say, sociology and criminology, or psychology and sociology, means that you're bringing different approaches and you're able to reconcile those in your own thinking. And that makes for someone who's quite adaptable and versatile in the workplace. Again, I think for status reasons, some employers don't like it because they feel that that student hasn't got that level of depth. And I think that's perhaps a particular case in some of those subjects that are more high status, like law, for example. Not all lawyers, study sociology and law, for example. So I think that, you need to, again, think about that issue and what kind of career you want to go into. What happens with a combined honours degree is you don't do twice as much. You do the core elements of each subject, and it particularly works where those subjects work together. So, for example, most of our combined students in our school are criminology and sociology, and that works really well together. Politics and philosophy, they work really well together, politics and history. So I think that's the sort of, it makes sense to choose combinations that actually, complement each other like that. So that tends to improve the student experience. Yeah, we do offer years abroad at Keele, and again, you can find out a bit more about that on our website. Yeah, I mean, your own teachers understand the issue about teaching practice and so on, but definitely volunteering with young people in some form, even if it's just a little bit, a few weeks or a few hours each week, is a really good thing to do. I think that's all the questions. And just to say, if any of you are doing EPQs, thank you for that, Sian, on topics that you think I could help with, I'm happy to discuss things sociological with you. I can't promise that I could supply lots of other colleagues to do it in lots of other subjects, but we do have that range of subjects that you see on the slides. So if you're interested in crime and deviance, I know that's often a module on the sociology A level. We have colleagues who do stuff on the family, on work, and lots of things, and other areas like politics and philosophy too. So if that is something, if you wanted to have a chat with some of us about your EPQ and resources perhaps that we could share with you, we have easy access to research papers and stuff like that, and some of us write some of them. So I'm happy to broker that as an offer if that would help in your studies.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. I will address that issue with you, Charlotte. So if you want to hang on in the meet, Charlotte, then I can talk to you about that. And also Lauren Sutcliffe, if you could stay in, that'd be really helpful. Anyway, Rebecca, I'm conscious of the time as well, and what you've done today is unbelievably valuable for the students.
Thank you.
The presentation, and I think that they've got an awful lot out of the Q&A as well. So very much appreciate your time. And thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. I'm happy to come and hopefully meet you in person at some point. When we can
that'll
all
be
do
nice.
that.
Yes, I'll look forward to that.
See some of you at Keele, but I'll send the slide through to you, Sian, as well after the event, so you can pass them on.
Right. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you.
You're
Take
welcome.
care. Have a good
Bye,
evening.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.